I'm Tracy Sabol. Tonight on EWTN News Nightly, crisis in the Middle East. Israel's latest strike kills several humanitarian aid workers. The world responds. Paying the bill. Lawmakers debate where the money is coming from to fix the collapsed Maryland Bridge. We're on Capitol Hill. Making waves. A lawsuit on the constitutionality of the first religious charter school heads to Oklahoma's Supreme Court. We examine what's at stake. And honoring a legacy. We remember one of the greatest Catholic leaders of our time on the anniversary of his death. These stories and more tonight.
From EWTN, the Global Catholic Network, this is EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you for being with us. Our top story tonight, the Israeli Prime Minister calls it unintentional. The CEO of World Central Kitchen calls it unforgivable, but safe to say nearly everyone would call it a tragedy. Israeli airstrikes hit an aid convoy, killing 7 team members from the World Central Kitchen, founded by celebrity chef Jose Andres. The group has been heavily involved in Gaza relief efforts. In a statement, the aid group says the team was traveling in a deconflicted zone in 2 armored cars branded with the World Central Kitchen logo. The group added that it had coordinated the movements with Israeli defense forces. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu acknowledged that Israel was to blame, but said it was not deliberate.
Unfortunately, in the last day, there was a tragic incident where our forces unintentionally struck innocent people in the Gaza Strip. It happens in war, and we are thoroughly investigating it. We are in contact with the governments, and we'll do everything to prevent such occurrences in the future.
All right, for more, let's bring in Associated Press journalist Sam Mednick, who is in Jerusalem for us now. Sam, good to see you. So we just heard that statement from the Israeli Prime Minister. What's the reaction there to this strike?
Well, there has been international condemnation about what has happened. Everyone is speaking out, and for several reasons. One is because there were high hopes that this was going to be a new route for aid to come in because people in Gaza desperately need it, but also and primarily because this World Central Kitchen said that it spoke to the Israeli army. It coordinated its movements with them. They knew where they were going, and it was still struck. Images and photos of the aftermath of the attack show the cars. They had logos of the World Central Kitchen on the rooftops. The aid workers were wearing World Central Kitchen clothing. They were also wearing protective gear. But there was a strike that went right through the roof of one of the cars. 2 of the other cars were completely incinerated and they were mangled. Israel has said they've acknowledged the attack. They said that they killed innocent civilians and that they are going to do everything they can to make sure that this does not happen again. Let's listen to what spokesperson Daniel Hungary had to say.
The work of WCK is critical. They are the front lines of humanity. We will get to the bottom of this, and we will share our findings transparently.
Well, Sam, how has the aid group responded?
Well, the World Central Kitchen has said that this is awful. They've called it a catastrophe. The founder of it has called it heartbreaking. He wrote on his Twitter that this was terrible, that food is being used as a weapon of war, and that they have also suspended their activities. Now, I've spoken to people in Gaza about this as well, who they are very concerned about this. They are relying on a lot of this assistance. They said that this news tonight is very concerning for them, particularly the people in the south and the people in the north. The situation, the humanitarian situation in Gaza is absolutely catastrophic. Organizations, the United Nations, as well as aid groups have warned that there could be imminent famine in northern Gaza by July, with more than 1 million people facing catastrophic levels of hunger. So this is a very devastating news across the board and for several different reasons.
Yeah, Sam, very tragic all around. I want to switch gears now. Iran, as you know, is vowing revenge for that Israeli airstrike on their embassy building in Syria that killed Iranian military and intelligence officials. What do you think this retaliation would look like? And also, what's the feeling in Israel right now about this? Do you know?
Well, it's unclear what the retaliation would look like, but we do know that Iran said on Tuesday that it was going to respond, and it said it was going to make Israel regret what it called acts of crime and other similar acts. We also know that Hezbollah, the militant group operating out of Lebanon, they're allies with Iran, they also responded, and they said that they were going to punish Israel. Now, Israel has not responded to this attack, but on Monday, the army did say that it felt Iran was responsible for escalating tensions in the region in using its proxies, and the Minister of Defense, Yoav Gallant, said on Tuesday that Israel was facing wars on multiple fronts, both offensively and defensively. And this just increases fears already that the war in Israel is going to expand regionally. Israel has long targeted Hamas, Hezbollah fighters and Iranian fighters inside of Syria, but it rarely talks about it and rarely acknowledges those attacks.
All right, Sam Mendick in Jerusalem for us tonight. Thank you. The Biden administration says the U.S. is heartbroken and deeply troubled by the strike that killed the aid workers from World Central Kitchen, adding the victims have been doing extraordinary, brave work. The U.S. is also calling for a complete investigation. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, tonight the Biden administration is extending its condolences to the families of those killed in that airstrike. Now, at the same time, President Biden has scheduled a meeting today here at the White House with a small group of Muslim American community leaders to try to ease tensions as the war in Gaza drags on.
In the press briefing room, White House National Security spokesman John Kirby addresses reporters concerning the deadly Israeli airstrike on aid workers delivering food in Gaza.
We were outraged to learn of an IDF strike that killed a number of civilian humanitarian workers yesterday from the World Central Kitchen, which has been relentless in working to get food to those who are hungry in Gaza and, quite frankly, around the world.
And overseas, during a visit to Paris, meeting with his French counterpart, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken called the aid workers who died heroes.
They run into the fire, not away from it. They show the best of what humanity has to offer when the going really gets tough.
And Blinken said they must be protected. He also said the U.S. has spoken directly to the Israeli government about the airstrike.
We've urged a swift, a thorough, and impartial investigation to understand exactly what happened.
Back at the White House, John Kirby addresses Rafah in Gaza and Israel's planned invasion to destroy Hamas. Top American and Israeli officials held virtual talks Monday as the U.S. pushed alternatives to the ground assault, a move the U.S. opposes on humanitarian grounds. An estimated 4 battalions of Hamas fighters are dispersed among more than 1.3 million civilians.
The whole reason to have that meeting was to talk about our concerns over a major ground operation in Rafah and to present viable alternatives for them to be more precise and more targeted.
The Biden administration is reportedly also weighing selling Israel up to 50 new F-15 fighter jets.
Separately tonight, President Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping spoke by phone today. It was their first conversation since November. One of the items discussed, Taiwan. The White House says President Biden emphasized the importance of maintaining peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait and the rule of law and freedom of navigation in the South China Sea. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
President Joe Biden calls a pro-life measure in Florida outrageous. The state Supreme Court cleared the way for Florida to ban abortions after 6 weeks. The White House says that it will put the health and lives of millions of women at risk. But pro-life groups are pushing back.
We don't think it's a choice. A child is not a choice, right? A child is a gift.
The Florida Supreme Court also issued another ruling that puts abortion on the ballot. Voters will decide in November if the state constitution should allow abortion. SBA Pro-Life America asked people in Florida to oppose the amendment, writing, "Not only will this measure bring dangerous late-term abortions back to Florida, but it will allow girls who aren't old enough to get their ears pierced on their own get an abortion without a parent's okay." Former President Trump is back on the campaign trail. During remarks today in Grand Rapids, Michigan, he took a hard line against President Joe Biden's immigration policies.
Under crooked Joe Biden, every state is now a border state. Every town is now a border town because Joe Biden has brought the carnage and chaos and killing from all over the world and dumped it straight into our backyards.
Now, the former president has kept Biden's handling of the southern border as a primary focus. Polling suggests that Trump has advantage on immigration issues, with many voters concerned about illegal border crossings. The former president added that if elected, his administration will deliver justice for those who have been killed by anyone who enters the country illegally. From the campaign trail to the courtroom, the judge overseeing Trump's hush money criminal trial has extended a gag order. It now includes family members of the judge and district attorney. This follows the former president's recent verbal attacks on Judge Juan Merchan and his daughter, who works for a company that represents several prominent Democrats. The former president's lawyers fought the expansion, saying that he was engaging in protected campaign speech. Well, the owner and manager of the cargo ship that rammed into Baltimore's Francis Scott Key Bridge filed a court petition this week. He is seeking to limit the company's legal liability for the deadly disaster. It is a routine but important procedure for cases under U.S. maritime law. Meanwhile, the rush is on to open the vital body of water. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales has the latest. Eric?
Good evening, Tracy. The cargo ship named the Dolly is owned by the Singapore-based Grace Ocean Private Limited. Now, the company, along with the ship's manager, filed a petition to seek a cap on the company's liability at roughly $43.6 million. As that lawsuit plays out, Maryland's governor says progress is being made to open the ship's channel for goods and services.
We cannot rebuild the bridge until we clear the wreckage. But I'm telling you, we are going to get this done. We will clear the channel, we will move the Dolly, we will rebuild the Francis Scott Key Bridge.
President Biden has made sure that will be done. We have the resources necessary to deal with the mission of cleaning up the channel.
Today, the first vessel to use an alternate channel to bypass the wreckage happened this morning. A barge supplying jet fuel to the Department of Defense left the port. Officials say they're working on a second channel as well. Meanwhile, government agencies' response is in full swing.
Since this happened, right, there's been $60 million of emergency funds from the Department of Transportation that is helping to cover costs. We are, it's a whole of government approach. The Small Business Administration also declared a disaster, which is going to free up some loans for small businesses.
Experts say the cost of clearing the channel and rebuilding the bridge is likely to be hundreds of millions of dollars. The U.S. Navy released 3D underwater images of the site showing the sheer magnitude of the salvage operation ahead. Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen says the federal government will pick up 90% of the cost under an existing emergency aid program.
Then Senator Cardin and myself and Congressman Fume will be introducing legislation to make up that difference so that we meet the president's, request and insistence that the federal government step in during this national emergency.
President Biden says Congress should pay for it. Some Republicans tell me rebuilding the bridge can wait.
This bridge is not going to be built for several years from now, so there's no reason to rush out and commit. It'll probably be $1 billion bridge, and again, we could commit that money 2 or 3 or 4 years from now. There's no need to do it now.
It was kind of outrageous immediately for Biden to express in this tragedy the idea that he's going to use federal funds to pay for it in entirety. I mean, he doesn't refer to it as the American taxpayer dollars on anything.
And by the way, President Biden will travel to Baltimore on Friday to get an update from state and local officials. His administration is expected to decide on a package to help rebuild the Francis Scott Key Bridge prior to that visit. But as you heard, that could be a fight once Congress returns next week. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
And we have a lot more still to come here on EWTN News Nightly, including Catholic charter school, why Oklahoma's Attorney General wants to take the virtual school St. Isidore of Seville offline, and a shocking school shooting in Finland leaves one student dead and others injured at the hands of one of their own. Welcome back. It is a story that we have been following for quite some time now, and today the Supreme Court of Oklahoma heard arguments in a case involving the decision to approve the first Catholic online charter school. Republican Attorney General Garnett Drummond is leading the charge against St. Isidore of Seville Charter School. He says the decision will lead to, quote, state-funded Catholicism. Republican Governor Kevin Stitt supports the school. He called its establishment a victory for religious freedom. And for insights on the case and what happened in court today, let's bring in Rick Garnett, director of the program on church, state, and society at the University of Notre Dame Law School. Rick, thanks so much for coming on. We appreciate it. So why is the Oklahoma Attorney General so against the opening of the school, and what is the basis of his lawsuit?
Well, in my view, he's misunderstanding two key principles of American church-state law. So one of those principles is that even though we've always distinguished between church and state in order to protect religious freedom, we've also always permitted cooperation between governments on the one hand and religious institutions on the other in order to provide vital public goods. Think of all the religious hospitals that do good services, all the religious social welfare agencies. And Attorney General Drummond just seems to be under the mistaken impression that that violates the separation of church and state, that kind of cooperation. The other thing he's missing out on is that the Supreme Court has very clearly been emphasizing another key principle, and that is that governments are not permitted to discriminate against religious providers and religious actors. And that's precisely what Attorney General Drummond is proposing. The St. Isidore school is simply asking to participate as one among many other charter school providers. And the only reason it's being singled out for exclusion by the Attorney General, or attempted exclusion, is because it's religious. And the free exercise clause of the First Amendment doesn't permit that. So the law is on St. Isidore's side on this one. And it's just a mistake to think that permitting cooperation with a charter school amounts to a violation of the separation of church and state.
Yeah, Rick, fill us in, if you will, on what happened today in court, and what were your big takeaways?
Well, I wasn't able to be present, unfortunately, although some of my Notre Dame colleagues were, but I was able to watch it on YouTube. I thought it was, as a law professor, I enjoyed it a lot. I thought it was an impressive conversation. I do think, as I've already said, that what I regard as the misunderstanding of the Attorney General was sort of brought out by the lawyers who are supporting the chartering. The key thing to appreciate here, in my view anyway, is that charter school laws differ from state to state. In Oklahoma, the model is that charter schools are not government schools. They're more like public contractors. And if you think of imagine if the government decides it wants to build a road, it might well hire a private paving company or a private landscaping company. That doesn't convert that landscaping company into the government. And the Attorney General seemed to be under the impression that if the government of Oklahoma cooperated in any way with a private provider in order to bring about the public good of education, that it somehow converted that private provider into a state actor. That's just not the law. St. Isidore, it is a Catholic school, but it's not the government. It's providing a public good to the community. And again, it's a public good that Oklahoma is allowed to subcontract for. So I'm hoping that the Oklahoma Supreme Court will, with the help of the lawyers, see what the law truly is and will allow this project to go forward.
Yeah, really quickly, about 30 seconds left or so. But I know one of the cases that the school referenced was Carson versus Macon, that Supreme Court case. Quickly, can you tell us, if you will, how does that stand up? Wouldn't that maybe supersede state laws?
Carson versus Macon is a key case for St. Isidore's. Carson is the case that really doubles down on the idea that governments can't discriminate against otherwise qualified religious providers in the context of an education program. So the Supreme Court's latest word on this is squarely on the side of St. Isidore.
All right, we're going to leave it right there. Rick, thank you so much for weighing in. We appreciate it. God bless.
Thank you.
Well, at least one preteen student is dead and several other people are injured after a 12-year-old opened fire at a school in Finland. The shooting took place at a school with 800 students just outside of the capital in Helsinki. Police say the suspect and victims were all just 12 years old. The suspect used a handgun registered to a relative. Police detained the suspect. No immediate word on a motive. Russia says that some of its industrial facilities have been attacked by Ukraine. The drone strike left several people injured. Local officials also say that a hostel for students was damaged in that attack. Another drone that attempted to strike a refinery was downed by air defenses. It marks Ukraine's deepest strike inside of Russian territory. Up next on EWTN News Nightly, it has been nearly 20 years since his death. We reflect on the lasting legacy of Pope John Paul II with a report from Rome and analysis from Dr. Paul Kengor. Today, the church honors the anniversary of the death of St. John Paul II. On April 2nd, 2005, the Polish Pope's death was announced at the end of a long illness. EWTN Vatican Bureau Chief Andreas Tannhauser has more.
Carissimi fratelli e sorelle.
Dear brothers and sisters, today at 9:37 p.m., our beloved Holy Father, John Paul II, returned to the house of the Father.
It was a Saturday in early April when Archbishop Leonardo Sandri, substitute for the General Affairs in the Secretariat of State, announced to the faithful in St. Peter's Square the death of Pope John Paul II.
Pater Noster.
A few days earlier, the Polish Pope had been unable to attend the Way of the Cross. On March 25th of that year, the Holy Night Vigil had been led by then Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger. However, during the Easter Mass, the Pope briefly appeared at the window looking out over St. Peter's Square. The Pontiff's increasingly critical condition led to cardiac arrest and the Holy Father's death on the evening of April 2nd, 2005. Within a matter of days, 3 million pilgrims flocked to Rome to pay their respects to the late Pope, waiting in line for up to 24 hours in hopes of entering St. Peter's Basilica. On April the 8th, the day of Pope John Paul II's funeral, Rome declared a day of public mourning, closing schools and offices to honor the pontiff.
Il mio saluto raggiunge inoltre.
Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, as Dean of the College of Cardinals, presided over the funeral, during which thousands of pilgrims chanted Santo Subito, meaning declare him a saint now, calling for an immediate canonization of the Polish Pope. Buried in the Vatican grottos beneath the basilica, the Pope's coffin was lowered into a tomb created in the niche previously occupied by the remains of Pope John XXIII. In June 2005, nearly 3 months after the pontiff's death, the cause for beatification was opened by Cardinal Camillo Ruini. Beatified in May 2011, John Paul II was canonized just 3 years later, in April 2014, 9 years after his death. In Rome, Andreas Tannhauser, EWTN News Nightly.
And for more analysis, we turn now to Dr. Paul Kengor, author of A Pope and a President, John Paul II, Ronald Reagan, and the extraordinary untold story of the 20th century. Paul, so good to have you back on. So take us back to 19 years ago when Pope John Paul II died. How did the faithful in the world react?
Yeah, I'll tell you, Tracy, I remember it very well. And I mean, for one thing, it was this really long papacy, right? It was 27 years. And that made him the longest, or third longest serving pope ever, behind only Peter and Pope Pius IX, who was 1846, 1878, 32 years. So he was the longest serving pope since Leo XIII, longest of the 20th century. And, you know, just this really impactful papacy that alone almost made him John Paul the Great because he was there for so long. But I'll never forget the dates. And, you know, he had with him this association with the number 13, and Cardinal Bertone pointed this out. Cardinal Givich pointed this out. He was almost assassinated on the feast day of Our Lady of Fatima, which was May 13th, 1981. He died on April 2nd, 2005, and Bertone and the others pointed this out, which is 4/2/2005, adds up to 13, and he died at 21:37 on the clock, so 9:37 Roman time, so 2137 adds up to 13. And a lot of people were thinking, will he make it to May 13th? Will he make it to maybe the feast day of Our Lady of Fatima? But ironically, He dies of all the dates that he could die on the vigil of the eve of Divine Mercy Sunday, which was just so perfectly fitting, because he was the Pope who canonized Saint Faustina. She was the first saint of the new millennium. She was Polish, just like him. She died in 1938, a year before World War II, which started in Poland. So for him to die on the eve of Divine Mercy at 21:37 p.m., 4/2/2005. Just so many neat numbers that were associated with his death.
Yeah, it's really incredible, and something I've really never even thought about before. And his funeral at the Vatican, Paul, as you know, was one of the largest gatherings of diplomats and world leaders in human history. Take us back to that day. What was that scene like?
Yeah, millions of people came, and they buried him in this very simple wooden casket that had a Marian cross on it. He was the totus tuus Pope, right? Totally yours, Mary, through Jesus. And again, he believed, looking back at when he was almost assassinated, May 13th, 1981, feast day of Our Lady of Fatima, May 13th, 1917, and he said 2/13ths of May, 2/13ths of May, and he believed that the hand of the Blessed Mother. He said one hand fired the bullet, another deflected it. And at that moment that he went down, and the later Cardinal Givich, who's just a priest at that point, is holding him, and he's saying, Holy Mary, Mother of God, Holy Mary, Blessed Mother, intercede for me, intercede for me. His father had told him at his mother's death, brought him to Our Lady of Częstochowa in Poland, the Black Madonna, and said, this is now your mother. This is now your mother. So he had this intense connection to the Blessed Mother. So for him to be buried that way with that Marian cross and the wooden casket, all these pilgrims coming in, and like the previous clip said, people chanting right away in St. Peter's Square, Santo Subito, Santo Subito, Saint right now, Saint right now. And it wasn't very long before he was canonized.
Wow. We don't have a whole lot of time left. We could talk about this forever, but quickly, Paul, where were you? Do you remember that time where you were when you heard that he had died, and also your reflections on him?
It was profound to me, Tracy, because I'm a convert. I mean, actually, I'm a revert. That's kind of a longer story. But I came into the church that April of 2005. And no figure influenced me more in that than John Paul II. Encyclicals like Veritatis Splendor, the Gospel of Life, on and on and on. What he did with the end of the Cold War, the way he fought communism, fought for the sanctity and dignity of human life. And so for me, for him to die right at that same time I was coming into the church, it really hit me profoundly on a personal level.
Yeah, indeed, and many of us as well. Paul, thank you so much for coming on today and speaking with us about it. Always appreciate it. God bless you, my friend.
Thanks, Tracy. Same to you.
And we thank you for watching tonight. Remember, you can follow us on social media, Facebook, X, and Instagram at EWTN News Nightly. I'm Tracy Sabol. Good night, and God bless.